Hey, everybody, welcome to Fictionology. This is Gideon,
And this is Bardikins.
coming to you live from our new top secret, undisclosed COVID bunker, riding out the storm. And actually, speaking of which, it seems like there might be some sunlight breaking through with the announcement of a new vaccine. Hopefully, fingers crossed, that works for everybody.
That'd be
Um,
great.
that would be, God, my God, it'd be great. You'd like to see the outdoors again, right?
Yes, and other countries too.
What are these things you speak of, other countries? Tell me
Long
more.
ago, people freely traveled across the big ocean.
Lies! Well, as long as we're still in quarantine, we thought we'd come to our vast audience of 7 people with
Woohoo!
yeah, I know, woo. We've grown. Our goal was eventually to like cap out at 9. If we hit 9, we'll probably call it a day. I think
Yeah,
that'll be
pretty
our
solid
goal.
numbers right there.
Absolutely, 10 is just entirely out of the question. So, um, we decided, Bartikins and I decided that we were gonna come to you guys with a different episode today. Instead of reviewing a video game or a television episode or a movie or a book, we thought we'd have a bit of a topical episode. Isn't that right, Bartikins?
That is correct.
Thought we'd spread our wings a bit and discuss something a bit broader than just a specific 40-minute narrative or a specific video game. And that said, it seems like we're on a Star Wars kick here lately, although I swear to God, that is not going to be the entirety of this channel. But with the Mandalorian back in progress with season 2 and Star Wars Squadrons having just come out, it seems like this is a Star Wars season. So with that in mind, and actually inspired by a recent conversation we had with some friends offline, we thought we'd actually blow the dust off the Star Wars lore and discuss the Force.
Dun dun dun.
No, you should have hummed like some sort of Star Wars score, not just a generic dun dun dun. If we edited things,
Dun
we'd
dun dun
probably edit that out.
dun dun.
Or however John Williams sounds. Over the years, Bardikins and I, and our shared love for Star Wars, have talked about just about everything Star Wars related, at least at the time. And obviously, the Force is a keystone component to the Star Wars cosmology, and for many people, it's the most interesting thing about it. And
Right.
we thought we'd freestyle, a bit and discuss our take on the Force, which is radically different, I think, from some elements of the fandom. I think that's a fair thing to say. What do you think?
Yeah, I think that people have their own feelings about the Force, and it may be quite a bit different than what we feel about it. And you know what? If they enjoy what they like, more power to them. But we're just going to kind of explain it, describe what we think about the Force and how it works and stuff like that.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, with a with a franchise as vast as Star Wars, and you have many different interpretations and preferences, and it's all subjective, right? I mean, I'm not I'm not one of those people, and I don't want to speak for Bardikins, but I don't think he is either. That think that art critique is this objective discipline. For the most part, what is good is entirely subjective. The important part is whether or not you can articulate or defend or explain why you like a thing or dislike a thing. And so we have our own subjective preference for how the Force should be interpreted in Star Wars lore, and we think we can defend it pretty well. But to his point, we're not trying to say that our take is inherently better or inherently worse than anyone else's.
Right. Right.
So,
Oh, go ahead.
no, I was just going to say, so I mean, I think in general, obviously, for I assume all 7 people listening are familiar with Star Wars and the Force.
They should be by now.
Yeah, yeah,
99% of our videos at the moment.
I know. Yeah, absolutely. But obviously, just a quick recap. And again, I don't have a quote memorized. I think I can paraphrase it well, but we're first introduced to the Force in the Star Wars lore in 1977 with Star Wars Episode 4, A New Hope. Obi-Wan explains it. Old Ben Kenobi explains it to a young Luke Skywalker on Tatooine. he says something to the effect of the Force is what gives a Jedi his power. It's an energy field. It's mysterious. It unites the galaxy. It penetrates us, binds us together. And from there, uh, we learn more and more about the Force with each subsequent movie. Um, in the original trilogy in particular, it's a very subtle, low fantasy, quote unquote space magic. I mean, it is what it
Right.
is. At least in terms of tropes, it is space magic, but it's a low fantasy form. It's about there's a strong spiritual element. Um, the Empire Strikes Back introduces more advanced forms of the Force. So, like in A New Hope, we see like mind suggestion, mind trickery from old Ben Kenobi. We see Darth Vader force choke a very mouthy, sassy Imperial admiral.
Yeah.
Um,
Pretty early on too. I mean, it's not like it took a long time for any of this to be established.
no, no, I mean it came out right out the gate, but it was very subtle in A New
Hmm.
Hope, right or wrong. And I'm not saying the subtle is necessarily better, but it was low key.
Right.
Um,
Right.
other than that, I think Luke, he used the Force to, like to be clairvoyant, to see things that, like when he was using the training droid, and he shouldn't be able to anticipate the droid's attacks, but he was able to. So there's some precognition, there's some clairvoyance, and then as the as the original trilogy unfurls, we see more advanced telekinesis during Vader's duel with Luke on Bespin. We see a bit of the really interesting thing that I didn't appreciate at the time, but I've grown to appreciate since then, was the Dagobah vision quest. Where Luke goes into the cave and he has this
Yeah, I remember
spiritual.
that.
Yeah, I mean it's an iconic scene where he has a spiritual confrontation with Darth Vader, and that was interesting because it wasn't a power. It wasn't a mental suggestion. It wasn't moving objects with your mind, even though we saw Yoda lift the X-wing out of the swamp. It was more psychic and cosmic and spiritual.
Like a
And
manifestation almost of the Force itself. It was very interesting scene, by the way. I mean, it scared me as a kid.
yeah, me too. Yeah, that part where Vader kind of slowly looms out of the darkness, and
Yeah.
yeah, and you're thinking, how the hell did he get in there? I mean, I remember being confused too, because I I actually thought he was there, and then obviously
Right.
when he decapitates him and you see Luke's face, it was kind of a bit of a mind screw for a young kid. I mean, it's not like David Fincher, or Christopher Nolan tier, but it was like a bit a shock, um, and the idea that it was all in his head. It's funny, yeah, it scared me too. Um, and then I think we see some telepathy, like some actual telepathy at the end of the movie, where Vader's trying to urge Luke to join him after Luke escapes, and Luke calls out to Leia to rescue him after the duel with Vader. And then in Return of the Jedi, you get even more. And the biggest one in Return of the Jedi is Sith lightning, Force lightning, which is about the closest thing at the time to a high fantasy power, and like a Harry Potter lightning flash and stuff like that. Um, and then obviously in the prequels, it gets um, more parsed, more explored, um,
Hmm.
to the chagrin of a lot of people. A lot of people did not like the further exploration of the Force. Excuse me. Um, midichlorians being introduced and stuff like that. It definitely took it was to me it was a bit of a reframing of the Force. I wouldn't say it was an outright contradiction, but it was a reframe. To go from the mysticism of the originals, the low key mysticism, to the more blatant, kind of pseudoscientific use of the Force, and interpretation of the Force in the prequels.
Yeah. It definitely got more visible in the prequels, right?
Yeah, and instead of being a cosmic energy field, the Jedi at the time of the prequels kind of looked at it as again, they didn't contradict what old Ben Kenobi said in the originals, but the the Jedi Order at the time of the prequels, like, they tried to quantify the Force. It seemed like they were very analytical, less, fluid in obeying its will, which I think is a recurring theme of the prequel trilogy and all the prequel era fiction, which is that there was a rigidity and a vanity to the Jedi Order at the time, and
Right, right.
I think Lucas intended that in the prequels, to emphasize, like, when Qui-Gon senses Anakin's strength in the Phantom Menace, young Anakin, first thing he does is he tries to measure it. We never saw anything like that in the original trilogy. In the original trilogy, you were either strong with the Force or you weren't. That was the phrase:
Right.
strong with the Force, strong with the dark side.
Sure.
And in the prequels, they try to slap a number on it. Your midichlorian count is over 20,000. And a lot of fans didn't like that. Did you?
Well, it really didn't bother me all that much, actually. And I kind of, it, and just sitting here thinking on it, it kind of, if you kind of zoom out to a more macro level, it kind of makes sense in some ways, right? You have a lot of Jedi here, and they're looking for more Jedi sometimes, right? The next generation, to
All the
train and
time, yeah.
everything. In the future, during the time of the original trilogy, some people didn't even believe the Force existed anymore by that time, right? It was
Yeah, it was a
almost
myth.
mythical at that
Yeah.
time. So it would kind of make sense that there was less focus on the analytical side of it, right? They didn't know how to measure. They didn't know what to look for. They just know, outside of maybe like Yoda or whatever, who was aging, and Ben,
Right.
who was just protecting Luke, right?
Well, and at that
Probably
point,
didn't
and
care.
to your point, yeah, exactly to your point. I mean, obviously they'd have the knowledge. They knew what if obviously within the continuity, since the originals come after the prequels, and they knew of midichlorians in the prequels, they had to have known about it in the originals, but they didn't care. They didn't have. It wasn't like they were going around testing people, doing blood tests on people. It was like, yeah, I got a vague hint that you're strong in the Force, and beggars can't be choosers here because we're in a really bad spot. So it doesn't matter if your midichlorian count is
Right.
20,000 or 20.
And it
You
may
know,
it may almost be beneficial to have a lower midichlorian count at that point, so you wouldn't draw the attention of the Inquisitors and stuff like that, which is introduced later. But
right, right. But
you get the
again, I mean,
idea.
to your point, that they did technically exist at the time, even if they weren't conceived of by Lucas. Um, so all that's fair, and I didn't I didn't dislike it at the time, and I don't think I dislike it now. I understand why people see it as an unnecessary demystification of the Force,
Mm-hmm.
but again, to your point, the Jedi of the prequels were a different breed compared to the ones we saw in the originals. I mean, they had a different philosophy, different mindset, and the the trajectory of the prequels, what happens to the Jedi, inform why the Jedi of the originals seem and feel very different compared to their counterparts, even though Obi-Wan and Yoda exist in both eras.
Right.
So to me, it was like a very arrogant, vain, but well-intentioned,
Sure.
group that had grown distant from, the average person. And in some ways, I think from the will of the Force, looking to analyze and quantify and measure a thing which is almost by definition beyond the ability to do that. you
Sure.
know
And to even try to like perfect it and manipulate it in ways that to further their own goals in that regard.
right, well
Um,
intentioned though they were.
sure.
Yeah.
Which kind of perhaps left them blind in some ways, and lost touch with some of the mystical sides of it that you see again later.
Yeah, and it's actually interesting because, again, to that point, in I don't know when the last time you saw episode 2 Attack of the Clones, but there is a line where Mace Windu says to Yoda in private, I think it's like, maybe near the last third of the film, that he thinks it's time. He says to Yoda, I think it's time that we inform the Senate that our ability to use the Force is diminished. And as the prequels explore, what he's referring to is, there's a lot going on under their noses. That, I mean, the return of the Sith, the imbalance in the Force,
Right.
The Separatists building up a droid army, the Republic having a clone army, and all this stuff. The Jedi are usually able to psychically sense these like major revelations, these sweeping socio-political events,
Uh-huh.
and they had no clue. And they're it's explored more deeply in the fiction surrounding the prequels in both canon and legends. But this idea is that the Jedi's extrasensory abilities, their clairvoyance, their precognition was becoming clouded. Their connection to those higher end cosmic powers was blunted, in part due to the machinations of the Emperor, but also in part, I think, or I hope this will be enshrined in canon, also in part due to the choices that they've made over generations. You know, Legends had this bad habit of blaming or crediting every weakness of the Jedi as being, created by the Emperor.
Uh-huh.
Like the Shroud of the Dark Side, that was all the Emperor, and that was all the Emperor's own wicked space mojo, and that's cool and whatnot. But I like the idea that it's a mixture of things, and that the Jedi's own decisions, not just the decisions of their enemy, but their own decisions, their own choices, their own failures, contributed to that decay of that connection.
And even like a refusal to grow, right? And
Yes.
change in some ways and be adaptive to different situations.
Yeah, well, and there again, see, that's so interesting because there again in Attack of the Clones, Episode 2, Yoda, I recall a line.
Yobi-Wan.
Yobi-Wan, the two merge, they become the Avatar. Fire Lord Ozai, wrong franchise. But anyway, he has a line. Yoda has a line to Mace Windu and Obi-Wan in Attack of the Clones where they're talking about Anakin and how headstrong Anakin is despite his abilities, and they broach the subject of arrogance, and Yoda very presciently, very astutely says it's a common flaw among it's a more and more common flaw among all Jedi, this arrogance, this hubris, even the older, more experienced ones. Now, the irony is, of course, that he himself is suffering. It's so funny. Yoda shrewdly makes that observation and yet still doesn't see the trap that he's leading the Jedi into, that was being sprung on them by the Sith. And so it's a really interesting insight to Yoda that, Yoda is sharp. Yoda still has these flashes of intuition and wisdom where he seems like he's almost on the cusp of something, and then he just completely disregards it. Which to me is actually believable. I mean, that's not, some people critique that as bad writing, but I think that's actually, even if it's unintended, I'm not going to sit here and say that Lucas necessarily intended it this way, but I think that's absolutely relatable.
Sure.
How many times have you, I know I've been in situations that in hindsight, I'm like, man, I was so close to figuring that thing out at the time, good, bad, or indifferent. And I just I just blitzed right past it. And then, eventually on down the road, I'm like, oh, that's what that meant. I see,
Right. It happens a lot, right?
Right. So, I do think that's interesting. This idea that, again, they're trying to control and quantify in a very scientific, dispassionate way this thing that's supposed to be suffused into their very being and guiding their actions and flowing through them in a very kind of Zen Buddhist kind of way, and I don't look at that as a contradiction. I look at that as development. That's part of the reason why the prequel Jedi failed, and that's the failure that old Ben Kenobi and old Master Yoda in the original trilogy are trying to rectify.
Yeah, I totally agree. I don't think it's a contradiction, and actually, it kind of fits. It may be a little clumsy, but it fits, I think.
And then, so we talked about the originals and the prequels, and then of course, that at that point in the timeline, you have a divergence in the sense that, when Disney purchased Star Wars in 2012, 2 years later in 2014, they did a continuity wipe, and all of the previous material, with the exception of the movies and the 2008 The Clone Wars CGI show, all the previous books, video games, comics, all that was called Legends. It was essentially decanonized in an alternate universe. Um, but it had its own continuity in the sense that it also used the end of Return of the Jedi as a launch point for its own stories. There was a lot of inconsistency, a lot of wildly disparate interpretation of the Force, and for my money, the best of Legends, as much of a mixed bag as it is, the best of the Legends is better than the best of canon so far. But it also had for every gem it had many, 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 many not gems. To put it politely, rocks. Yeah,
Yes.
I didn't want to make a fecal metaphor, but it had these things that were distinctly not gems. And then the Disney canon, I think, is more consistent in its quality, but I think the quality is consistently mediocre. It doesn't typically fall to the same depths that Legends did, but it certainly hasn't gone to the heights, in my opinion. But what's interesting is they've got their take on the Force feels very different. And then, of course, so you get to the sequels, in canon. And for my money, I think that the sequels definitely strived for an interpretation of the Force that hewed more closely to the originals. I mean, I think you'd agree that the sequels, for the most part, tried to distance themselves from the controversy of the prequels.
Yeah, it seemed like it anyways.
Right. And then what's funny is, in some ways, they came full circle, because by the Rise of Skywalker, they're doing crazy Force feats that are more in line with the prequels than the originals, and really they're dialed up to 11, even compared to the prequels. And the Force feels less spiritual by the Rise of Skywalker than it is like a generic space fantasy power.
Yeah, right. Almost personal, right? It's like a personal mana pool at that point.
Right. No, I think that is exactly right. I think that's a perfect way to describe it. They throw some tidbits there, and there's some interesting stuff. I'm not gonna say that there's not. I think that'd be disingenuous, but it's very much it doesn't seem like there's any consequence. It's just a zap zap pew pew. It is no different in my mind from Harry Potter magic or Lord of the Rings magic, in the sense that it's not a spiritually driven force that occasionally manifests in superhuman feats. It's just a thing. It's a tool, So I guess that's kind of, it's that's a recap. Like I said, we could go on for hours about the various cool and various not so cool places that Legends takes us. But that, I think, is a good recap of the Force as it's depicted in canon, which is the more contemporarily relevant continuity. I mean, I say that with all due respect to all the Legends fans out there. I consider myself one of them, even though I recognize its shortcomings. This is the age of Disney, love it or hate it. And so with that in mind, I guess of the three takes on the Force, and I'm not saying obviously they're necessarily mutually exclusive, or you have to choose one over the other two, but what are the things about the originals, the prequels, the sequels, and the bits of Disney canon lore that you've been exposed to that you like?
That's a very good question. I guess I do like spectacle. So it's really cool to see a lot of Force lightning being thrown around and everything, and literally zapping 1,000 ships at the same time, and avoiding
it was officially
allies.
16,000 ships,
Well, there you
according
go.
to Pablo Hidalgo. It's a lot of juice being thrown up there.
Absolutely love the spectacle, and the team never fails to provide a spectacle. Right?
Yeah.
Never, and never do.
Agreed.
I think what I prefer are actually the more subtle uses of the Force, such as um, sort of like the Jedi mind trick, right?
Hmm.
As it would be known, I guess. I don't know who came up with that term, but
That is as far as I am aware. That is technically the official. Like they don't even they very rarely use the word telepathy or telekinesis. It's
right,
like mind trick and force push or move
yeah,
object.
sure, sure.
Move
I like
object.
things move object. Yeah,
You have no I have no idea what the hell that means. I mean, they're so ambiguous when they
you
use
just pick up a
terminology like
pencil.
that's right.
Haha, force
Ooh, I've got
sensitive,
the force
baby.
now. I'm sorry, you were saying.
But no, I kind of like things like that a little bit more. Um, Pulling and pushing, battling, kind of battling with the telepathy against one another sometimes. But
Yeah.
Jedi mind tricks and it not always working depending on the person you use it on.
Right.
Um, those are things that I like. Very subtle uses of the Force. Sometimes less so if you're trying to push, like, lift an X-wing out of a swamp.
Right.
But it feels like they're manipulating, an energy that surrounds and penetrates everything, right? Just like it was
Right.
said, you know. And in that way, they are able to kind of channel it through their body, which, for
Hmm.
better or worse, is more susceptible to the Force
Right.
than the average person. And they're able to ask it to do things or whatever, however you want to quantify, how it actually is executed. They're
Right.
asking it, they're manipulating it, whatever, um, to accomplish feats that are impressive and superhuman, but not necessarily like world ending.
Right.
Um,
No,
and
I,
and
I,
these,
I, I agree with you. I think on that note, I think too often, I mean, because I also appreciate spectacle. I mean, spectacle is a huge part of Star Wars. In fact, it was the initial appeal of it, right?
right,
I'm not going
right,
to say it was the entire appeal, but that was the first thing you noticed. Um, but I think too often, lazy writers, and again, this is in canon, right? I mean, you cited, obviously, Rise of Skywalker, where, the reborn emperor, zaps the resistance fleet out of the sky. Now, I'm not going to sit here and pretend that there wasn't part of me as a big emperor fanboy and somebody who loves bright lights and style, that didn't really enjoy that. And certainly due to the fact that, again, in my opinion, at that point, the sequels were not in a position to be a cohesive, compelling story. At this point, it was pure fan service. So there was a huge part of me
right.
that loved that scene. But in an ideal world, I don't think that that should be a thing. And I mean, Legends was guilty of this. I mean, all the time. If I had a nickel for every Sith that ate a planet, or destroyed a fleet, or wiped out an army, um, too often it was reduced to silly, generic magic, right? And
Right, right.
and I'm not saying silly generic magic's bad. I love Harry Potter, right? And I mean, there are all sorts of fiction like, Buffy the Vampire Slayer, Charmed. I mean, there's all sorts of literary and televised fiction out there where there's a lot of zap zap and pew pew and it's fun, it's entertaining. Sometimes it's even like really compelling fiction. But that's not what Star Wars was supposed to be. You know, I I like the idea that, like you said, it is an energy field, and the Jedi's approach is a bit slower, more suggestive. Like you compare how Jedi and Sith approach telepathy, the mind trick. The
Mm-hmm.
Jedi will make suggestions, and it's not there is like a bit of an ethical violation there because they are in
Right,
many
sure.
ways violating the autonomy, the psychic autonomy of a person. But
Absolutely.
it's suggestive. Whereas, Sith tend to prefer like brute force, like mind hack, mind rape. I mean, it's like just like it is not suggestive. It's not, you know, trying to entice cooperation for an objective. It's like I'm just going to reach into the depths of your psyche and take what I need, and I'm going to do it in the most reckless, harmful way possible, just to be a dick. I mean, so the it's an interesting dichotomy. And the other interesting thing is again, Legends, I think more than canon took it to extremes. But when you see the Emperor in Return of the Jedi, he is human, but he is extremely malformed. And we know this later on from the lore, but even at the time, I read a behind the scenes book where Lucas was saying that the emperor looked the way he did, not just because he was old, right? It wasn't just liver spots and wrinkles. I mean, he had like a bulging forehead and yellow eyes, and
Right.
everything about him was bent and twisted. And it was supposed to be dark side corruption. He's channeling the Force in such corrupt ways that it is he's not feeble, right? I mean, like, he's feigning weakness. He's really not like decrepit. He's stronger than he looks, but it is twisting and malforming his body. And even the Force lightning thing, there again, video games in Legends and canon often devolve it into it's just electricity. Well, it's not. It's supposed to be like, if you read the novelization of Return of the Jedi, which came out in 1983 along with the film, and even the script, the official script, it's described as a corruption of the Force. It's not electricity. It is the Emperor twisting the Force in such a way that it's lashing out in what looks like lightning, and it's leeching the energy from Luke. It's like vampiric lightning strikes. It's corrupt. It's abhorrent. It's unnatural. And that's why you don't see, well, at least at the time, anyone else do it until they cast Christopher Lee, and they're like, well, hell, we're not going to turn Christopher Lee down if he wants lightning. We're too scared to tell him no.
Right.
But I like that. I mean, I think that Force lightning should have been probably the flashiest. Like that was. I think was the. I think that's where the Force probably. That's as far as it should go in terms of tangible zap. You know what I mean? Like it. I think if you take it too much further, then it gets really, really into Harry Potter land or whatever. But the way it was framed was just really eerie. And so I like when Star Wars manages to use the Force in a way that seems heavy. And I guess that's part of the reason why, as I've gotten older, I actually am more interested in the cosmic angles, like the vision quests in The Empire Strikes Back, the cave on Dagobah. The dyad, the Force dyad, I thought that was a cool thing from the sequels, one of the few things, but that was an interesting thing where it was a neat, weird use of the Force that also it wasn't about who has the most pew pew, to just wipe out a planet. I like the kind of niche, very particular, in many ways not even really useful in most situations, but these really cool superhuman things that would otherwise not be possible.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with you there. I like that as well. And the only other thing I was going to say is the other Force powers that you may not be able to see, because they're supposed to be moving really fast, right? And they're supposed to be fighting really fast. And the movies obviously can't really do that much justice without it looking funky and weird.
Right.
But that's kind of the stuff that I like. That's kind of what I pull from the films and everything. That's what I like the most. And then I totally agree with you about the Sith lightning, the Force lightning as we call it. I think that's about where it should be, right? Because I can't imagine. To me, if you're going to manipulate the Force in a way that corrupts it and pushes it in a way, perhaps it always manifests in some sort of way that looks like that lightning. You know what I mean? No matter how you try it, it may be a ball or whatever, but it's probably going to look the same. And that, to me, that's kind of where it stops for me. That's where anything shouldn't be too much bigger than, or too much flashier than that. Look totally different. That's what I like, anyways.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And really, I mean, we're talking about the powers of the Force, but I also think, and again, this kind of dovetails nicely in with a conversation that you and I had recently with some friends offline, some friends who disagree with us, and understandably so. But the idea of the Force as a vaguely sapient energy field that has its own will and whims, and pushes and pulls and ebbs and flows, and isn't just a tool to be used indiscriminately. Um, the idea that there are physical and spiritual consequences to how you use the Force, I find incredibly interesting.
Yeah,
Um,
same here.
when I was younger, I loved Return of the Jedi, even though in many ways I recognize it as the weakest of the three films, in a lot of ways the most disjointed. But when Return of the Jedi, was at its best, I think the emotional and entertaining highs of that film, like the confrontation between Luke and Vader before the Emperor, I don't think any scene in The Empire Strikes Back or A New Hope comes close to those scenes in the throne room. But then you also have Ewoks, stuff like that, and not that I'm going to crap on Ewoks, because I think Ewok hate is a bit overrated, but I do get it, where it's just like it's whiplash. You're getting these really dark, intense scenes in the throne room, and then you get or whatever noise.
Is that what they sound like?
Yeah, that is. Look, I haven't seen it in a while. Okay, but when I was younger, and especially after watching the prequels after it took me a while to really understand. Like, I remember being a teenager and really criticizing the scenes at Endor with in the throne room, right? Because after watching the prequels and seeing how long and masterfully Palpatine takes to seduce Anakin to the dark side, it seemed like his attempt with Luke and Return of the Jedi was like just telegraphed all the hell and back in comparison. Like, it seems so obvious and blatant and cheesy. And that was one of the things the prequels I thought did exceptionally well, was the story of the Emperor's rise to power and his relationship with Anakin and the slow burn of turning him to the dark side. So after seeing that, and then going back again and seeing what he does with Luke at Endor, I was like, I don't like that. That actually retroactively undermined Return of the Jedi for me for a long time, until I realized that I was looking at it wrong. See, the reason that I criticized it for the longest time is because in the prequels, whether you like them or not, whether you like the execution, the facts that drive Anakin to the dark side, or that compel him to make that choice, are perfectly understandable. In The Phantom Menace, he's a kid. He is an emotional, well-intentioned kid who is, characterized by fear and a compulsive need to help people, which is great, until you look at it from a different angle, and it's actually a part of it is a desire of a young, gifted prodigy who wants to control the fates of those around him. And the good news for everybody in The Phantom Menace is he wants to control them. He wants to help them, and he's willing to risk his life and everything because he wants to guide their fates in a way that is beneficial for him and for them.
Right.
Excuse me, for them. And he's willing to risk his life to do it. That's great. But there is a bit of control in there. You know what I mean? It's not just generosity. It's not just magnanimity. Part of it is a desire to control. I like these people. I want to exert my will on their lives, and in a way that I think is beneficial for them. And we see those habits obviously in greater and more sinister detail in Attack of the Clones and Revenge of the Sith. And it manifests into a fear of loss, and when his mother dies, and fear of losing Padme, and
fear of sand,
and just severe hatred of sand, his true arch nemesis.
That's right.
But no, all of that's perfectly understandable, and it's well laid out, and we see it manifest in ways so that it is perfectly believable that if Anakin Skywalker felt like his loved ones were in danger and required the power of the dark side, he would absolutely do it. But it was so much more methodical and thoughtful. And then in Return of the Jedi, the Emperor's plan is just to piss Luke off. Like, hey, how's it going? I'm just going to be an absolute jerk to you for the next 20 minutes. And at the end of it, you're going to be my new bitch. And that's the plan. And in comparison, it's just clumsy. Or at the very least, it is infinitely more simple.
Sure.
And the contrast didn't work for me for years until I realized that I was looking at it wrong, because the whole thing is, the dark side is not about a series of rational or understandable decisions. It can be. It can be, but it can also be like any other bad thing done in anger at any point. Sometimes we have understandable reasons for being angry. Sometimes we get angry and do bad things after a slow buildup, a long, slow buildup.
Mm-hmm.
And then there are times where otherwise well-intentioned good people snap in relatively short order under moments of extreme duress, and they can do terrible things in those moments, just as terrible as things done in slower and you know in that decisions that are the culminations of a long series of slow, calculated events.
Right, right.
And the Force, the dark side, is meant to be a um, it's not a rational thing. The reason that Lucas wrote it, and I think it was Lawrence Kasdan, and Richard Marquand, I can't remember, but the reason they wrote it in Return of the Jedi that way is because, if Han Solo had been in the room, if it had been Han Solo and Luke instead of Luke Skywalker, the Emperor's plan wouldn't have worked, because Han Solo could absolutely do something bad in anger and then kind of regret it and move on. You know what I
And
mean?
move on, right?
But that's not what happens with a Jedi. They are
At least,
tied. Go ahead.
right, right. At least it takes them 20 million times the effort, right, to get away from that.
Yes, 100%. And I didn't realize that at the time, the kind of the brilliance of that. That situation was uniquely dangerous to Luke and other Force users because they're tied. They don't just use, they are tied, tethered. It goes both ways, to an energy field that influences their actions. What did Obi-Wan say? The Force binds, penetrates us, brings the galaxy together. So what if the polarity of the Force, or whatever, what if the dark side slips in, and it works the same way? It binds you, it penetrates you, it infiltrates who you are. So if that connection is hijacked by bad emotions, or by a bad day, or by ill intent, or by all these things, hostility, why wouldn't that be enough to snare you? And so as I've gotten older, I've really appreciated the low-key brilliance of that scene. Is that the reason the Emperor thought, all I have to do is just piss this kid off in the worst possible moment, and I've got him. I've got him for the rest of his life. In fact, he says that line, that really creepy line, it's unavoidable. It is your destiny. You, like your father, are now mine. And he is just totally convinced, if I piss you off, I can make you an eternal slave to my will. And it's because it's true. That was the narrative drama of that scene. Is he did. It wasn't just that he almost came close to killing his father. The thing that causes him to relent at the last possible moment is when he looks at Vader's severed hand, and he looks at his own severed hand, and he realizes, I'm not just about to kill him, I'm about to take his place. And he pulls back at the last possible minute. Love that scene. And I don't think it contradicts anything with the prequels and Anakin Skywalker. I think the Emperor had two targets, and with the first target, it was different circumstances, so he had time to work on it longer and more insidiously. And then with Luke, the circumstances were different, but the objective was still the same. And it was two different paths. One was more circuitous or labyrinthine than the other, and the other one was pretty straightforward. But I think it's not contradictory. It shows a lot that's very interesting about the cosmology of Star Wars and about the Force, and the danger posed by the dark side.
Yeah, I certainly agree. And you can also look at it as in the prequels, he was also trying to, not only was he trying to slowly turn Anakin over to his side and manipulate him, but he was also trying to dismantle the Jedi Order. So he still needed Anakin, in there, right? And he was trying to dismantle, he was trying to get an outcome for his plans, right? That put him in power.
That's true,
So
and that's something I often don't take into consideration. That's true, but he was running two different gambits at the same time, which kind of fed into each other. So one's timeline affected the other. That's very true.
having Anakin in the Jedi Order without just immediately having him snap and join him actually benefited him greatly, or at least initially, anyways.
No, it's true, and really, actually, now that I'm thinking about it too, I mean, even in Revenge of the Sith, which the scene is criticized, but the scene where Anakin defends the Emperor against Mace Windu.
Yeah.
So there is actually a bit of a parallel there with Return of the Jedi, because after all the slow burn manipulation, Sidious has to put himself and Anakin in a situation where he essentially forces Anakin's hand. Kind of like how he did with Luke. It's different, particulars, but I have to put this kid in a powder keg situation where an emotional decision is made very quickly. At Endor, it was piss Luke off enough, put him in conflict with his dad, and try to get him to quickly kill his dad out of anger. I need a quick decision here. I need high emotional stakes. Same thing, really, in Revenge of the Sith, just different particulars. Go ahead.
Mm-hmm. Well, I was gonna say, and when he put it in motion, how quickly it avalanched into Vader, right? How fast it went from
exactly
just a sort of a brooding, depressed, arrogant Jedi to Vader, almost.
Right, and that's what I mean, where the scene was criticized, because Sidious has told, at this point, Sidious has told Anakin, I've got special knowledge. Okay, you are having visions that your wife will die in childbirth. You had visions that your mother would die. They came to pass, so you believe that these visions about your wife will pass. I have special knowledge that will save her. And Anakin initially refuses to join Sidious. He tattles on him to Mace. He's like, "Hey, Palpatine is Sidious. The Chancellor's a Sith Lord. We need to go get him." He does the right thing.
Right.
But Sidious puts himself in a situation, essentially uses himself as bait. Like, okay, he plays chicken with Anakin in a way, using Mace. He puts himself in a position where Mace is going to kill him, or potentially kill him, which will remove the knowledge Anakin thinks will save Padme's life. So it puts Anakin in a position where he, in order to save his wife, I mean, he does have a choice. He can let Sidious die. He does have a choice.
Mm-hmm.
But if he does, as far as he knows, he's essentially killed his wife. He's doomed his wife. So when persuasion doesn't work, Sidious puts his pawns in, or his targets in, situations where they have to make a quick second volatile choice. And it worked with Anakin. And as you say, Anakin quickly went from brooding, arrogant Jedi to cold, merciless sociopath. And that's the scene that people criticize. But actually, it makes sense in the context of even the originals, where, again, whatever buildup might be there, be it 5 minutes or 5 decades, at the end of the day, it seems like the dark side, it comes down to a split-second decision. Not in a vacuum, but there is a straw that breaks the camel's back. And because it's a corruptive spiritual energy field, when you make that choice, it's not a gradual decline. It seems like a pretty slippery vertical slope. You know what I mean? Like almost just like a straight fall. Because it's not just a guy agreeing to become a sociopathic, murderous enforcer. It's a guy who's hooked to the cosmic energy of the universe, and that connection is affected by his emotions or lack thereof, and he's been corrupted. It's not just space magic, it's like space, like heroin. It's like a drug addiction. Like he is, you know what I mean? That's what I'm saying. If Han Solo had been there in any of those situations, he could have done the good deed or the bad deed and then walked away, with whatever just baseline human guilt that we would, that a well-adjusted person would experience doing a bad thing, but not for a Force user. It's not about actions by themselves. Every action, every single choice has a cosmic implication because you are a cosmic being. And it's very interesting to me. That's very unique to Star Wars. And it makes me think, and this is what I wish we'd see more of. The life of a Jedi should suck.
It really should, right?
You know, one of your complaints as a big video gamer is how often, Jedi are fetishized in games. And I agree with you. And I definitely want you to talk more about that. But not just, on a power level, but the fact of the matter is, we all love Jedi. Man, we all wish we could be a Jedi. I think the moral of the story is, no, you don't. You think you do. You really don't want that.
No, because it's a tightrope, right? You got to walk it your whole life.
And one slip, one wrong, you may slip and catch your balance, right?
Right.
Keep walking.
You may catch your balance. You may fall into a safety net once or twice, and you're damaged, but you pick yourself back up.
Right.
But there's that one time, and it's all it takes.
Right. Right.
And as we see with Vader, it is possible to come out of even the worst funk, but it takes God levels of intervention
right.
and redemption to make that happen.
Right. And to that point, because we haven't even covered redemption, but that is the other side of the coin. And just as it should be painfully easy for a Force user to fall to the dark side under the right circumstances, the inverse should also be true. It should always be extremely difficult. It should be counter. It should be a counter relationship. Basically, my reading of the Force in the prequel and original films is it's extremely easy for even the best intentioned Jedi to fall to the dark side. And it's extremely difficult, if not impossible, for that person to redeem themselves in the Force. I like that. I like that it's easier, so much easier, because I think that that's a great metaphor for life. Set the space magic aside. It's a hell of a lot easier to make a mistake than it is to atone for it.
Sure, and that goes back to sort of the addiction analogy, right?
Right.
Because even when you redeem yourself, if you can, in the Force, with Jedi here, even when they redeem themselves, they have to spend their entire lives still thinking about, what if I slip up again?
Right. And I wish we saw more of that in the films. Unfortunately, the two film instances we see of redemption both,
ends in death.
Right. They get the easy way out.
Right.
But we actually see that in a bit of that in a high profile way in Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order. And I hope that's something that's explored more. That that's actually a great way to put it. Is almost like though the very, very few who flirt with the dark side and pull back almost have to treat it as though they're a recovering alcoholic. It's a condition to be managed in perpetuity, and it's not something that ever leaves you.
And that may explain why some of the old Jedi ways were draconian, right?
Oh, 100%. I think, and I'm not saying that I'm agreeing with the prequel, because I completely believe that the entire point of the prequels is that it was trying to show the Jedi, again, were well-intentioned. They were not the villains. Some people take it too far and the point of the prequels is that the Jedi and the Sith are absolutely no different. Obviously not. That's insane.
That's crazy. Yeah, right.
That has no basis in reality. But I do think George was making a point that Jedi are fallible, not just individually, but on an institutional level.
Well, sure. In some ways, their quest to keep themselves away from the dark side manifests in fear, right? Which is ultimately something that could lead you to the dark side.
Very true. You're right. No, and and then what's interesting there too on the redemption line is, it's interesting in the originals, after Luke finds out that Vader is his father. I think it's Return of the Jedi. So he finds out in Empire Strikes Back, and then he has a conversation with the spirit of Obi-Wan and Yoda in Return of the Jedi. And I think that, again, I don't have the exact line, but he pitches that to him. Well, look, if Vader's my dad, I can save him. And Obi-Wan, it's out of the question. Absolutely not. It's just not possible. Once you fall, what's that line from Yoda? Something forever will it dominate your destiny. But they do not even, they knew Anakin. They not only know Vader, they knew Anakin. They knew Anakin at his best. Right. And they're saying, nah, he can't be helped. Out of the question. And if you try, you're going to get yourself killed. You have to fight your father and kill him and the threat that he represents. You cannot try. There is no rehabilitative or restorative justice to be had here. He is a threat. There is nothing that can be done about that other than neutralize the threat. And Luke proves them wrong, right?
Right.
Which is, again, a great scene. And even that in and of itself shows that the Jedi are still, even after the prequels, it's not like the prequels was a low point and everything after that, they're just okay, sorry, we slipped up there, but we're great now. They still get stuff wrong, even after the prequels, because they were wrong. They were absolutely wrong.
They were.
Yeah, had Luke gone in there to kill Vader, he either would have done it and replaced Vader, or he would have died. One of the two. It was either he took the path that Obi-Wan and Yoda set him on unwittingly would have led to either his corruption or his death. But he staked it all on faith in his father. And it gave them a third option that the Jedi didn't see and the Emperor didn't see. And that's the beauty of that scene. You know?
Yeah.
And that's one thing about, there again, legends I don't like, and parts of canon I don't like, because it's in books. Asajj Ventress from the Clone Wars TV show, there's a canon book about her that's a sequel to the Clone Wars TV show, and she's a dark side user. If you remember, she's an acolyte of Dooku's, and
right.
And she becomes a dark side ally of Obi-Wan briefly in the Clone Wars, and of Ahsoka in the Clone Wars season 5. And then this book is set after season 5. And anyway, long and short of it is, her arc ends with her essentially redeemed. And I don't like that, because that should have been proof to the Jedi at the time that, okay, redemption's possible. Right. So the heck with your forever shall it dominate your destiny. That's not true. You've got like 7 examples in the last 20 years where they're like, not like, it was like switching political party affiliation. They're like, no, I'm this one now, and they, I'm voting in the primaries. Like, what? Like, if it's that simple, or if it's that possible, then they shouldn't have ruled it out for Vader, especially if it was someone they once knew and loved and respected. You would think they'd be even more inclined to give him the benefit of the doubt and be like, okay, well, look, it's probably going to be tough, but you know what? You're right. It is a viable option to try to redeem him, so maybe you should try to do that. But they ruled it out. They just dismissed it right out of hand. Sure. I hate it.
Yeah, and her case is kind of weird, because isn't she like technically from Dathomir or something?
Yeah, she's a Night Sister.
So aren't they like dark side inclined anyways, or whatever?
Yeah, and this is where, I mean, I love when the Force traditions are expanded, and it's not just Jedi and Sith. Jedi and Sith are the main ones, and I get it, and they should be, but I like this like more esoteric.
Yeah, this is sort of like the occult, right?
Right, and I think Jedi Fallen Order, as we've discussed, does that very, very well. But yeah, Night Sisters are dark side inclined. They use the Force. It's a twisted manifestation of the Force. Like they are capable of things or demonstrate abilities that we don't see out of conventional Jedi and Sith. But it is ultimately a manifestation of the Force. It's just channeled a certain way through Dathomir, which has special properties, blah, 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 blah. But yes, she is dark side inclined, just due to her upbringing. And actually, Ventress was taken from her backstory. She was taken from Dathomir, or she was sent off Dathomir. I can't remember. She was initially trained as a Jedi. Her mentor was killed. Dooku found her afterwards, and she was, like she went all Dark Knight or the Punisher on people, and she was like killing, in her mind, what were criminals and scum in revenge. And then Dooku found her, saw her talent, and lured her fully to the dark side. And then one thing leads to another, and she dies redeemed. I don't like that. I think that maybe I can see one or two in the entirety of canon.
Yeah.
Up until Vader, but it should be obscure.
I was just trying to think, like, maybe, if she had only known dark side the entire time, redemption might be easier, if there's a path that's like, hey, this is
it's
new. Hard.
Yeah.
It's hard to get there, but you've never known this before.
Right. Well, and it's actually you make an interesting observation that actually plays out in a similar way, but not quite, with Darth Maul. So I don't know. Have you seen the full episode of the Clone Wars where, or not Clone Wars, Rebels, where Maul and Obi-Wan have their final duel?
I've just seen the scene of the duel itself.
The duel, which everybody loves. I don't, but whatever. When Obi-Wan mortally injures Maul doesn't instantly die. Obi-Wan catches him as he falls, and they have a conversation. And Maul asks, because he's already deduced, and this is actually what prompted the fight. When he finds Obi-Wan on Tatooine, Maul deduces that Obi-Wan wouldn't be here unless he had a purpose. And especially in the time of the Empire, when he could be trying to, incite rebellion or resistance against the Empire. So not only does he have a purpose here, he must be protecting something. Otherwise, he'd leave and go to a different planet. And then he realizes it's not something, it's someone.
Right.
Luke.
Right.
He doesn't know it's Luke, but as soon as he realizes it's someone, Obi-Wan, who had been calm the entire time, pulls out his weapon because he realizes Maul is getting close to sniffing Luke out, so to speak. They have their duel. Maul loses badly. He's mortally injured. Obi-Wan cradles him, and it's a really touching scene. Obi-Wan doesn't gloat, his final words aren't, "Man, you suck." But they have an interesting conversation. Maul just very simply asks, he goes, "Is he the chosen one?" And Obi-Wan says he is, because at this point he thinks Luke is. Now we know Anakin's the chosen one, but at this point. Right. Obi-Wan's written Anakin off because he's become Vader. So he thinks Luke is, okay, now I was wrong about Anakin. Luke must be the chosen one. Luke's who I'm hanging my hopes on. Oh, and Obi-Wan says, yeah, he is. And Maul says, he will avenge us, and then dies. And what's interesting about that scene, and it's so much better actually watching it than my recap, which doesn't do it justice. But what's interesting is it's a touching scene, and Maul had been fleshed out in ways that he hadn't been in Legends or in even early canon in The Phantom Menace. He is evil. Mm-hmm. He is cruel. He's vindictive. Yeah. He's psychotic.
Absolutely.
But he also has attachments. He loves, his brother, Savage Opress. He is loyal to his mother, Talzin. He is not pure evil, like the Emperor.
Right, and he hates Palpatine.
Yes, he does. He absolutely hates Palpatine. Well, but that's actually what's interesting. So, Maul wasn't redeemed.
No.
But as they say in the commentary, he gets close to it, like he kind of skirts it. But he ends unredeemed because instead of letting go of his hate, he only reaffirms it. He will avenge us.
Right. That's good. Palpatine's gonna die.
Right. So he comes close to this understanding with Obi-Wan, because he's like, he will avenge us. You were screwed by the Emperor. I was screwed by the Emperor. And so it's like, oh, okay, they're about to have this touch out, but so we're gonna, Luke's gonna screw him even worse, and then and then he dies. He dies right after, and you can see the look of utter disappointment on Obi-Wan's face, like, oh my God, he got so close to, so it's very tragic. But that, I think, is more interesting than just every Tom, Sith, and Harry upon death, except the Emperor, just being redeemed. it should be a thing that's few and far between.
Sure.
But yeah,
Sure, I agree.
I really like that. And again, I know we can talk about this for ages. I guess the last thing I want to say, just the subtopic is, the prequels introduced the prophecy of the chosen one. Didn't go into vivid detail about it, but said that there was a chosen one who would bring balance to the Force.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of fans have discussed, balance means reducing the Jedi numbers to equal the Sith numbers. It means getting rid of the Jedi and then the Sith. Lucas has clarified that it means getting rid of the Sith, specifically the Emperor. And Rise of Skywalker, in an ass-backwards roundabout way, reaffirms that when you hear the voice of Anakin's whisper to Rey, "Bring back the balance as I did," right before she's about to kill the Emperor. So killing the Emperor is what brings balance to the Force. A lot of people, I mean, it's a huge part of the Star Wars cosmology, but there's still quite a few people that don't like that. They think it adds an unnecessary wrinkle or layer to Vader's redemption, and it should have just been a father saving his son at the cost of his own life, and not some sort of preordained, prophesied, thing. And that bringing balance to the Force is just this weird nebulous concept, and what's it do for the future of storytelling? Does that mean Darksider can be involved, or do they have to be ever in Palpatine's shadow? Have you ever thought? I mean, I don't think you and I have ever talked the prophecy specifically. So, what are your honest, just off the cuff thoughts about the prophecy?
Well, the prophecy itself, it's like one of the most common things in literature, right?
Right.
In fantasy, science fiction. It's always there,
Seems like it.
Not as much these days, I don't think, but it is a cliche, I think. But I can see it being sort of like an invention, of there's a prophecy that someone will bring balance to the Force, and I think that's right. The bringing the balance to the Force is getting rid of Palpatine, or the Sith in general. And so I don't get, it doesn't bother me. It really doesn't bother me. It's just, it's used so much, right? There's always a chosen one.
Do you think Star Wars should be careful with using that trope in the future?
Yeah, I think so. Because I think they have to be careful with all of their sequel stuff anyways, so as not to, not that the Force can't be unbalanced, I guess, in the future, but they don't want to trivialize.
I mean, I guess technically it did. I mean, Anakin brought balance by killing the Emperor, but the Emperor came back, and apparently balance had to be restored again. So I mean, it happened. Now it was the same.
Right.
It was the same guy, so I guess we're more inclined to give it a pass. But
right, but there's always going to be some sort of corruption that comes, tries, and I guess there will be more people who will try to bring the balance back over and over again. But they have to do it in a way that doesn't trivialize what happened
right
during the original trilogy, and I guess now the sequel trilogy as well, because that's kind of like an important event, a key event, right? That doesn't mean that people won't still use the dark side in the future. I think they will. I think even as Palpatine was dead, there are probably thousands of people still using the dark side, rogue inquisitors, things like that. So I don't think they'll get rid of those guys ever. But it's I don't think it'll affect anything too awful bad. I think the prophecy is, like I said, kind of cliche. It's used a lot, a little overused. But the actual balance itself, we've seen that it can come and go in certain situations. So they've kind of freed themselves up to do whatever they want if they want to make a sequel or a sequel trilogy. 50 years in the future.
I hope the sequels mark the end point of the continuity. I really do. I don't see any benefit.
No. Right. If they go in the future like 80 years, it'll just be, like, to me, just all new stuff, right? New people, new things, new whatever. Give themselves something to work with, something to play with. It takes place far outside of like any sort of Skywalker, right? Or fake Skywalker. Uh, and it's on its own. It does its own thing. They can kind of invent their own villains.
Yeah, no, I'm all for non Skywalker stories and new villains and new pockets of um of the continuity and of the galaxy as a location. But I mean literally, if I had it my way, I hope this is the pin, this is the button in it, and they don't make a habit of constantly progressing the continuity. Go back and tell concurrent stories. Go back and tell stories in the past, but that have nothing to do with the Skywalkers. So the outcomes of those stories are truly up in the air and there's still tension. But Legends had a bad habit of doing this too. So, um, obviously you had Return of the Jedi, and then the Thrawn trilogy jump started the expanded universe as we know it, and it continued the Galactic Civil War for I think it was like a dozen novels with the new Imperial Remnant Thread of the Week, and just one right after another. And then you get into the new Jedi Order series, which was flawed, but again, its high points were just chef's kiss. I mean, they were wonderful. And it ends beautifully, in my opinion, with one of the best Star Wars books I've ever read, one of the best books I've ever read, period, called The Unifying Force. And James Luceno, the author, just tied it all beautifully up in a bow. It was epic. It was emotionally compelling. It gave Luke, Han, and Leia great moments while also passing the torch on to the next generation. It had compelling, formidable villains. It was a continuity just delight. It was wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. And it should have stopped right there as far as the continuity. If they wanted to publish more books, tell more stories, do it in different parts of the timeline, but for God's sakes, do not fall into that Hollywood trap of it's time for a sequel. But that's what they did. And they gave us Legacy of the Force, which was awful. They gave us Fate of the Jedi, which was worse than Legacy of the Force in a lot of ways. And then they gave us the Legacy comics, which was set 100 years after A New Hope or Return of the Jedi, one of the two. And to your point, if they're going to do that, which I don't think they should ever for any reason, but if they do, you need to tack on a couple of zeros onto it, because 100 years in the Legends Legacy comics, the Sith rule the galaxy again. And it's only been like, 20 years after the death of Luke Skywalker. That's entirely too short of a time. You have trampled over the accomplishments of these characters, but like it needs to be 10,000 years of peace. And then you can whatever, even though again, I don't think you should. But Legends did it in the very worst possible way. They had a great, beautiful send-off to the expanded universe, and they could have gone back and told a zillion different other stories. And then they gave a sequel, which was bad, and a worse sequel, which was bad. Then they just like felt like, we've got 30, 40 years we need to knock out here. So then we're just going to do the Legacy comics. And then the Legacy comics were better than the two series that preceded it, but I don't think it justified it. I think it wiped out, it crapped all over Luke's accomplishments, burnt his Jedi Order to the ground. The New Republic was taken over by a new empire. I mean, I just don't like that. So I think, especially after the Rise of Skywalker is supposed to be the end of the Skywalker saga, the definitive end of the Jedi and Sith, confrontation, and it ends ambiguously. We don't know if a new Republic's going to be invented or a new Jedi Order. It just ends ambiguously. This is one of those things where we don't need an answer. Leave it alone. But they won't. They say they will. They won't. There's going to be some post Rise of Skywalker stories that deal with Rey and the main characters, and not just in their own pocket doing their own thing. And that's so sad. I hope I'm wrong, but I sense I'm not. Yeah. But yeah, like I said, we could talk about the Force, I know, nonstop, but I thought that was a good thing to riff on and freestyle on, especially since the recent conversation we had. So I'm open to picking it up, other aspects of it, and like specific stories and whatever later on down the road. But I think I'm tapped out on the Force right now. I think balance has been brought to my Force today. What do you think?
Very wise.
Why, thank you. Anything you want to add?
No, I'm good. I think I think we could have 4 or 5 hours of discussion on this. So
Yeah.
I think this is a good starting point, and
Yeah.
then we can look at specific instances and stuff like that later on if we want.
And then maybe one day, like, talk about something that has absolutely nothing to do with Star Wars, maybe, possibly.
Yeah, right.
I know, I'm telling you. But okay, well, I think that's it. I think the fictionologists are putting down the pens, putting down the magnifying glasses, and the other instruments. That was kind of ambiguous there. I've got nothing more to add, so I think this is Gideon signing off.
And this is Bardican signing off. Please remember to like and subscribe if you would like to see more of this.
And even if you wouldn't, we also ask that you still like and subscribe and just fake it.
We have to get to our goal of 9 people. So
9 people. That is like almost insurmountable. We really need your help. Okay? Desperately. Yeah, please like and subscribe, and may the Force be with you.
And
see what
with
I did there? You see what I did there?
You kind of ruined my half of it, but yeah, thanks.
I did what? I ruined your half of it?
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe.
All right, everybody, we're out.
See you in the next one.